They say the first time you see the moon through the ancient lens, you hear it, a whisper not in your ears, but in your bones. Dr. Alara Voss never believed in myths. She was a lunar archaeologist, a title that sounded more glamorous than it truly was. She studied the structures beneath the regolith, scanning for unnatural symmetry, mapping metallic anomalies buried in Mare Crisium and Oceanus Procellarum. But this wasn't natural. That the artifact they uncovered beneath the crater defied logic. A monolith made of a black, reflective material that didn't reflect anything. No light, no heat, no radiation, just stillness. Like the void had taken form. Elira's team thought it might be a burial marker, but that theory died the night she listened to it. She had stayed late at the base station, studying audio fluctuations from seismic sensors embedded around the site. The monitors translated vibrations into sound, and for the first time, something responded, a voice, soft, incomprehensible, but undeniably alive. It didn't come from the ground, it came from beneath it, something sealed. And then she made the mistake that would curse her forever. She spoke back. "Who are you?" The voice stopped. Silence held the room in its teeth. Then, "You already know my name." Her nose bled, her vision blackened. A memory that wasn't hers slithered into her mind. An ocean that stretched across stars. A tower made of screams. And a moon not in the sky but chained like a shackle. She collapsed hours later. She awoke with words carved into her palm. Letters she didn't understand. But somehow, she could feel their meaning. It was a warning: never say the name, never say the name, never say the name. And yet, something inside her whispered, "Say it." Alara Voss didn't return to the dig site the next morning. Not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. Her body obeyed her. But her thoughts moved like syrup, thick and foreign. She stared at the letters burned into her palm, watching them shift when she blinked. It wasn't pain that came from the symbols, it was pressure, like something behind them was pushing through, trying to speak. The medical officer, Dr. Han, insisted she was dehydrated and sleep deprived. "You've been staring at that crater for 6 days straight," he said. "Maybe you just imagined it. The pressure up here messes with cognition. You need rest, not riddles." She wanted to believe him, but deep inside, she knew better. That thing beneath the lunar crust, it hadn't spoken to her by chance. That night, sleep never came. The base lights flickered at 2:17. A low hum trembled through the station, far too deep for any of the team's equipment. The hum vibrated through bone, like the resonance of a massive bell struck far underground. Then the lights died. Alara wasn't alone in the dark. Something watched, not through windows or cameras, but through her own memories. She could feel it turning the pages of her past, leafing through her childhood, her mother's face, her first kiss, her fears, her guilt. It wasn't seeing her, it was reconstructing her. "You are the vessel. I remember your shape." The voice came from inside her skull. And then Alara saw it. A tower, inverted and suspended inside the moon, pulsing with shapes that didn't obey geometry. At its base, a shape that couldn't move, yet reached out through dream and stone. That it wasn't speaking English, not even a language. It was meaning force-fed into her, and beneath it all was a name, something older than sound, older than light. Not spoken, but known, not remembered, but encoded in the void. Her mouth moved. She almost said it. A scream outside stopped her. She snapped back into the real world. An alert blared in red on her datapad. Automated distress. Team B, dig site alpha biometric. Data lost all 4 members. Asterisk. She ran. By the time she arrived, the crater was silent again. Silent, and changed. The monolith had cracked. Thin black veins now ran from its surface like roots burrowing outward through the dust. The excavation chamber was empty, no blood, no bodies, just helmets, crushed inward from the inside. In the dust, something had been etched by hand, but not with human fingers. The grooves were too deep, too smooth, too perfect. 3 symbols, the same ones on her palm, and one more, an incomplete glyph, as if whatever wrote it had been interrupted. She didn't understand it, but it stared back at her, and she knew, if that glyph is ever finished, the name will be released, and the moon will no longer be a prison, it will become a gate. The Lunar Command Center on Earth didn't respond to Alara's emergency transmissions, not after the second distress beacon, not after the camera feeds cut out, not even after she sent a direct neural link request, normally reserved for off-world medical emergencies. She was alone, or worse, not alone. The remaining 6 members of the crew moved through the corridors like ghosts, shaken by the loss of Team B. No one asked what had happened. They had seen the crushed helmets, they had seen the absence of blood, of wounds. It was as if the bodies had been sucked inward, devoured by their own atoms. Dr. Hahn began muttering to himself in the sleep chamber. He hadn't spoken since the incident, only traced circles on the walls with a sharp stylus. Perfect spirals tight at the center, wild at the edges, and always turning counterclockwise. When Elara tried to speak with him, he only whispered one thing, over and over. The glyph must not be completed. It dreams in the dark between stars. She checked the central AI logs, desperate for answers. There she found something no one else had noticed. A file labeled Protocol S0. Access required retinal, neural, and voice confirmation from a lunar commander dead for over a decade. But Elara, she remembered the name, a name she shouldn't know. Commander Abigail. He, THYR, first to map the Schrödinger crater, presumed dead after her rover malfunctioned near Site Alpha No. Remains were ever recovered. Elara accessed the voice database. The system shouldn't have allowed it. But it did. She spliced together a crude simulation of Heather's voice using old logs, spoke the required phrase, and somehow the AI accepted it. The file opened. Classified Protocol SO Silence Protocol Date, the 14th of October 2057 level, Omega clearance. If this file is being accessed, it means containment has failed. The structure beneath Schrödinger is not alien, it is pre-terrestrial. Its geometry predates the moon itself. It is not a ruin, it is a lock. We built the moon around it. We built myths around it. We built time around it. The god beneath the surface is not dead. It is dreaming. It was imprisoned by beings we cannot remember, using concepts we no longer possess. Its name is a weapon. It can infect languages, spread through sound, through symbols, through understanding. To speak its name is to invoke it. To understand its name is to invite it. We named this failsafe the Silence Protocol. If contact is made, all humans on the lunar surface must be silenced, not killed silenced. Memory scrubbed, neural loops reset. Because once you know the name, you are no longer fully human. You are an opening. Elara stepped away from the screen in horror. They knew. They had always known. The moon wasn't just a celestial body. It was a prison shell, built by forgotten architects, containing something beyond reason. A god not worshipped but feared. And the worst part, it was beginning to wake up. The glyph on her palm began to pulse like a heartbeat. And in the base's oxygen garden. Dr. Hahn had completed his spiral. At the center was the missing glyph, and as soon as it was finished, every plant in the room wilted at once. The lights dimmed. The walls breathed. And the base's communication hub whispered through static. You almost remember me. The static didn't stop, it pulsed in rhythmic bursts. Like Morse code in an alien tongue. Elara sat alone in the darkened comms room, bathed in the cold flicker of dying screens. Her breath fogged the visor of her emergency suit. She hadn't taken it off since the garden died. She no longer trusted the air inside the station. Not after Hahn screamed and his lungs turned to ashdod. It happened without warning. One moment he stood staring at the spiral he had drawn, muttering about how the roots were in place, and then his body convulsed. He screamed in a voice that was not his. 1,000 voices layered atop one another, male and female, child and elder, beast and machine. It wasn't a cry of pain, that it was a birth cry. Then he collapsed, choking on his final breath. When Elara rolled him over, there was no blood, no trauma, just grey powder where his lungs should have been. Black spores drifted from his nose and mouth, evaporating into nothing as they touched air. The base AI went silent shortly after. The monitors glitched, then froze, then displayed a single phrase across all screens. We remember the lock. She didn't sleep, couldn't. Instead, she opened the sealed archives. All of them. Maps of the lunar tunnels showed passages far older than the base. Structures buried deep in the sublunar mantle, massive chambers shaped like eyes, oriented inward. Everything in the moon pointed to one place. The Well of Chains. At its center was the original glyph, not a word. Not a sigil, but a shape three-dimensional, constantly shifting, like a Mobius strip formed from concepts rather than matter. It was carved into the fabric of space-time, a wound that had never healed. The files were incomplete, fragmented, corrupted by time or something worse. But one note stood out, left by a researcher named Dr. Kana Euro. These aren't ruins, they're anchor points. The moon is a containment field. The god wasn't sealed by force, it was sealed by geometry, myth, and perception. We are its jailers, and our forgetting is part of the cage. But if we remember too much, we become the key. Elara dropped the tablet. Her glyph, once dormant, was now fully visible. A new line had appeared overnight, connecting two of the existing symbols. It wasn't complete, not yet, but it was forming, and with it came memories that weren't hers. A world that orbited no star, a civilization of six-limbed beings with crystal skulls and minds tuned to vibration. A ritual, a sacrifice, a warning chiseled. In the bones of their dead he does not speak, he remembers. Then something terrible, something primordial rose from beneath their world and consumed not just the bodies of their people, but their histories. The same god, the same name, snapped out of the vision screaming. The moon beneath her feet shivered, not physically but as a concept. Something had shifted in the idea of the moon itself. The last surviving crew member, Juno, burst into the room, eyes wild. Elara, you need to see this. The crater, it's changed. They ran to the viewport overlooking Schrödinger. Saw was impossible. The monolith was gone. In its place, a spiraling descent of steps that hadn't been there before, leading down into the hollow moon, lit not by electricity but by a pale, soft light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And from the abyss came a sound no throat could produce. It wasn't calling them, it was welcoming them back. There was no debate, and Juno stood at the edge of the spiral staircase, staring down into the impossible. It had replaced the monolith entirely. No debris, no dust, no evidence it had ever existed. Just the opening, wide and yawning like the gullet of a sleeping god. I'm not going down there, Juno said, voice trembling. Elara said nothing. She couldn't because her feet were already moving. It wasn't compulsion, it wasn't possession, it was recognition. The way a seed recognizes the soil it came from. Each step downward brought clarity, like the pressurization of thought. The air grew thicker the deeper they went, not in a physical sense, but spiritually, like descending into a dream someone else had long ago and never finished. The stairs spiraled endlessly, carved from stone that shimmered black-blue like obsidian soaked in memory. The walls were smooth, engraved with more glyphs familiar, others too alien to hold in the mind. Elara blinked, and a line of symbols shifted like living things, aligning themselves in patterns she understood. They were stories, not written, but remembered. Visions flashed in her mind as she passed. A temple with no doors, sealed with thought, worshipped by a race that had no eyes. A sun that wept blood for 40 nights, begging forgiveness for what it had illuminated. A mouth in the sky, wide and silent, where moons once orbited freely until they were chained. Juno followed reluctantly, whispering prayers between clenched teeth. She had begun to bleed from the nose, and her eyes twitched at every flicker of light. This place isn't real, she mumbled. This isn't the moon, this isn't anything. After hours or seconds they reached the bottom, and there it stood. The well of chains. It was not a well, not in the human sense, it was a hole in meaning, a cavity in the foundation of being. An absence of is. Around it floated 6 monolithic stones, each spinning slowly, etched with the same incomplete glyph as the one on Ilara's palm. Together, they formed a circle like teeth in a jaw, chains not of metal, but of light and thought descended into the void, disappearing into nothing. But something tugged on them from below, and then, it rose. Not all of it, just a sliver, a shard of what lay beneath. It did not have form, only suggestion. The curve of a spine that belonged to no creature. The impression of eyes layered over eyes, mouths that did not open but unfolded. Elara dropped to her knees, her mind buckled. Juno screamed behind her, the kind of scream that tears something loose in the soul, and then the voice came, not through ears, through history. My name is almost known again. Speak it, and the prison fails. Unchain me, and I will unmake forgetting. Elara tried to resist. She tried, but the glyph on her palm had changed again, now just one line short of completion. Juno, blood running from her eyes now, crawled forward. We can't let it out. Elara, please. If you know anything human, please run. But Elara looked at her, and smiled. We already did. She whispered. And the final glyph began to burn. The glyph ignited, not with fire, but with memory. Elara screamed, not in pain but in recognition. Every moment, every thought, every lifetime her soul had touched. In the past, be it human or something before, came rushing back like floodwaters, tearing through a rotted dam. She was no longer Elara Voss. She was the remnant of the first jailer, the last survivor of a forgotten pantheon, the one chosen not to destroy the god, but to forget it perfectly. That was the key to the Prasanna, perfect forgetting, a lock sealed by ignorance. But now she remembered, and the name, its true names, on the tip of her tongue. Behind her, Juno was on her knees, bloodied and broken, but still human. Elara, she begged, her voice more breath than word. Please, whatever that thing is, it's lying to you. You're not a jailer. You're a door. Ilara turned slowly. Her eyes were now black. Not colored black, empty, twin voids that pulled the light from the chamber around her. Up at the 6 stones circling the well, they had begun to descend, slowly drifting downward into the pit as the chains snapped one by one, releasing a sound like the stars, wailing dot and then light, but not ordinary light. It did not illuminate, it revealed that it poured from the well of chains in a steady beam, but instead of brightening the chamber, it bled secrets into the air, shifting glyphs, silhouettes of long-dead beings, and thoughts that had weight and mass. Light touched Juno's body and she convulsed, clawing at her head. It's thinking through me, Ilara. Make it stop. But Ilara couldn't hear her anymore. She had stepped into the light and the Godtha thing spoke directly into her blood. You are mine. You always were. You carved the first sigil. You sealed me in myth. You made forgetting divine. But now ... double quotes, you have remembered. The final glyph burned into her skin, completing the name. And that name was not a word. It was not a sound, that it was a function, a metaphysical command written into the structure of reality itself, something that should never be spoken, because to speak it is to run it. It executed, and the moon shook from deep within the crust. Entire layers of rock folded inward like collapsing lungs. The illusion of solid ground began to warp. Gravity reversed, then rippled like water struck by thunder. The stars themselves blinked, as if flinching from what had been released. Juno tried to crawl away, but her body was already cracking, as if her bones were being rewritten. Ilara, she cried one last time, I don't want to see it. And she didn't, because the god showed her. For just a moment, Juno saw Itol of it. The multitudes it had devoured, the suns it had folded, the languages it had corrupted, the gods it had undone. And then she was gone. Asterisk, not killed, not consumed. Erased us if she had never been born. Ilara stood alone now in the chamber, her mind open, her body shaking with the force of 1,000 times. The chains were gone, the monoliths had shattered. The well was now a throat, wide and trembling, and the voice whispered, not to her but through her, I have a mouth again. Earth saw it first as a glitch. Satellites orbiting the moon began, transmitting corrupted data frames smeared with static, signals warped by impossible gravitational drift. Tides stuttered. Deep-sea buoys recorded fluctuations in oceanic pressure that made no meteorological sense. Then came the lunar bloom. Astronomers at the Keck Observatory stared in stunned silence as the southern hemisphere of the moon lit up, in a fractal pattern, veins of pale white searing across its surface like lightning frozen in stone. It wasn't light. It was thought radiating out from Schrödinger crater in conscious geometry down in the ancient hollow beneath that crater. Ilara stood transformed. She no longer blinked. Her body had become the container. Her mind, once fragmented by fear, had fused with the thing that slumbered in the well, a god, not born of stars or time, but of concept, negation, and memory denied. It had no true name, for names were mortal inventions. But now, it wore hers. Like a mask, Ilara, it whispered, savoring the syllables as it once savored galaxies. Around her. The stones that once floated above the well were now dust, drifting in a vacuum that wasn't physical but spiritual. The well was no longer sealed, it had become a throat, and from that abyss came a voice not heard with ears, but with remembrance. The kind of remembrance that comes before sleep, where something inside you insists. You've seen this before, a god that feeds not on flesh or fire, but on awareness. Above ground, the lunar base was no more. It had unfolded, transformed into a grotesque bloom of metal and bone. Walls had fused into veins. Screens had grown eyelids. What was once habitat was now womb. Inside it, nothing lived. Outside, the stairs still stood spiraling endlessly into the depths, and the voice kept growing. Back on Earth, linguists began to report a strange phenomenon. People writing the same glyphs in their sleep. Children repeating syllables no one had taught them. Audio recordings picking up non-existent voices, whispering in frequencies beyond human speech. A scientist in Istanbul tore out his own tongue. A monk in Kyoto walked into the ocean, smiling. A woman in Brazil painted the surface of the moon, a dark room, never having seen it. The name had begun to spread, not through sound or sight, but through recognition. Back on the moon, Ilara stepped forward. She stood at the edge of the well. The new god behind her, inside her, through her, its body, if such a thing could be called, that was beginning to manifest, not with shape, but with effect. The chamber bent, not physically, existentially. The stone remembered a time before it was solid. Light remembered a time before it was defined by speed, and Alara remembered everything. The first time she had spoken to the god wasn't in the crater. It was in a life before this one. She had been chosen once, a warden, a jailer. Now, she was the key. She raised her hand, and the glyph blazed across the moon's crust. A new tide began to rise, not in the ocean, but in reality itself. The prison is broken, she said, and her voice echoed across time. The jailers are forgotten. The lock's undone. The world will remember the god, and the god will remember the world. And far below, something massive and ancient moved in the dark, uncoiling. The mouth opened. And Earth looked up. As the moon began to speak, the sound came first. A low, resonant note, too deep for instruments, too wide for language. It spread across the planet, not through air, but through thought. Entire populations paused mid-conversation, their words hijacked by something older than breath. Birds fell silent. Dogs whimpered and pressed themselves to the ground. Glass didn't shatter, it melted. At first, no one knew what was happening. Then they looked up. And the moon, that pale, familiar face in the sky, was no longer still. The surface seemed to move, shifting in patterns that rippled like muscle. Beneath skin, the light, normally silver and steady, now pulsed in deliberate rhythm. Cities fell into blackout. Satellites fried. The ISS went dark. On every screen still working, the same phrase appeared. Do you remember me now? Governments scrambled to respond. World leaders convened in bunkers. Religious leaders declared the end. Scientists shouted about gravitational anomalies and quantum ruptures, but none of them could explain what everyone felt. The moon was no longer an object. It was a presence, a being, a mouth, and it had begun to speak. Meanwhile, beneath the surface, Alara no longer walked. She floated, suspended in the gravitational dream of the god. Her body was still human, but her mind had been hollowed out and filled with stars that had long since died. She now existed in multiple times at once. She remembered pasts that never happened, futures already crumbling, and the moment she first carved the glyph into the bones of her own soul. Behind her, the god unfolded, limbless, faceless, endless. Its presence was not size, but implication. Wherever it was, it rewrote the space it inhabited. Walls turned into symbols. Air into memory, dust into history. Alara spoke, and her voice echoed across the hollow chamber like a knife made of prophecy. You remember now, they all do. The forgetting is over. Chains no longer held it. They had unraveled from the well and now floated above it, writhing in zero-gravity loops. They looked like serpents made of silver fire, desperate to bind something again. But it was too late. Above ground, the lunar crust began to peel layer by layer, not explode, peel like bark from a tree that had been hiding something within. And then Earth saw it, a massive sigil slowly burning itself into the visible side of the moon, spanning hundreds of kilometers, visible from every part of the planet. It was not art, it was a broadcast. The god was telling its story, and everyone, everywhere, was beginning to understand it. In Rome, a priest clawed at the altar, screaming the words in Latin. In Siberia, an old woman wept while painting the glyphs on her wall with her own blood. In Nairobi, children stood in circles, humming the frequency. In Tokyo, a voice came through every radio at once, reading a name no one had ever learned, but somehow knew. The glyphs were no longer confined to the moon. They had taken root in humanity's collective memory. Myths around the world began to converge. Stories that had never shared roots were now identical in key places. The same god, the same betrayal, the same imprisonment, and always that warning. To remember it fully is to release it. And now, it had been remembered. Back in the hollow, Alara knelt at the edge of the well, her eyes bleeding light. Behind her, the god loomed, still not fully emerged, but leaking through space. Like ink in water, she felt it stretching itself toward Earth, pressing against the very skin of reality. But then something resisted, a tremor. Not in the ground, but in the cosmos itself. A force pushed back, a memory deeper than the god's own. Not a human memory, but one older, carved into the bones of the universe. A final seal, hidden not in myth or matter, but in meaning. And the god hissed it, knew it wasn't free, not fully. One lock remained, and Elaroa, what she had become, would have to break it. The god turned its infinite focus on her. You know where it is, you hid it from me. Take me there. And Alara obeyed. Earth was breaking, not with fire, not with war. With understanding. As the name of the god echoed silently across the globe, more people awakened to vision-strewn memories of something they were never supposed to recall. Ancient nightmares encoded in their DNA, prophecies buried, not in books, but in the folds of the brain. They saw cities beneath oceans, cathedrals grown from bone, stars that whispered names into their sleep. Long before their ancestors could write, the world was remembering, but not everyone. A resistance had begun not with weapons, but with silence. Small enclaves around the world, led by monks, mystics, and forgotten bloodlines, had activated an ancient defense, the vow of unknowing. Those who took it severed their minds from memory. They locked their thoughts inside geometric mandalas, chanted antonyms, and erased themselves from the psychic chorus. The god couldn't speak through them. They had become null zones, islands of forgetfulness in a sea of remembering. But the god didn't fear them because it had Elara. Far beneath the surface of the moon. In the chamber where geometry once imprisoned a god, Elara led it through an ancient corridor carved in no recognizable shape. It wound through dimensions, through meaning, through time that bled backward. The god had no feet, no body, but it moved. It pressed against reality like a pressure from behind the eyes. The walls vibrated with its presence, warping from smooth stone to story, to song, to flesh, then back again. Ahead stood the final lock. It wasn't a door. It wasn't even material. It was a concept, a machine of thought, forged by the first beings who'd known the god and refused to worship it. Six-sided, infinite in its dimensions, hovering above a pool of frozen time. It pulsed with a hum. Hadn't heard in centuries but now remembered, the heartbeat of the universe before the god came. Dud. As they approached, the lock stirred. A voice emerged, not a word, but a verdict. You were made to forget. You chose to remember. This is your punishment. The lock wasn't just for the god. It had been built for Elara, or whatever Elara had once been. The god flinched not in fear, but in recognition. It had been tricked. The jailer had not merely locked it away, she had tied herself to the key, sacrificing her identity to become the last failsafe. She could only bring the god to the lock by becoming what she had sworn never to be again. The lock whispered, "You've brought it here. Now you must decide." Elara dropped to her knees. For the first time since the glyph burned complete, she wept up because now she remembered everything. The forging of the chains, in the light of the dying star, the betrayal of the first pantheon, sacrifice of herself not to destroy the god, but to outlast it. The moon, carved from an ancient world, launched into orbit to serve as its cage, and the promise she had made in the beginning: when the world is ready to remember, I will choose, if it should. Behind her, the god began to change. Its form trembled. It felt fear. It knew that if Elara chose silence again, it would be trapped not for another 1,000 years, but forever. This was its final escape attempt, and she was its last doorway. It spoke to her not with words, but with everything it had ever been. Visions poured into her mind, galaxies devoured. Cultures reshaped in its image, universes that had accepted it and become beautiful, terrifying, eternal, that whispered the lie it had always used: I will free them. Elara closed her eyes. She had once believed that, but not now. She rose. One final glyph hovered in the air, unwritten, unspoken, not of naming, not of sealing, but of ending. No more, she said, voice trembling with the gravity of millennia. She touched the glyph. The final lock began to shine. The god screamed a scream that tore the surface of the moon, shattered reality across lunar space, and echoed into the minds of all who had remembered. It. Then, silence, not absence. Erasure. The glyph spun, pulsed, folded, and the god was gone. The lock dimmed. The glyph dissolved into vapor, and the god, the unnameable, the devourer of memory, the whisperer in dreams, was no more. Not sealed, not banished, but unwritten. A hush fell across the universe. The pulse that had echoed from the moon for days stopped in an instant. Earth's tides stabilized. The stars ceased their tremble, and humanity, for the first time in millennia, was truly alone beneath the sky. Elara collapsed, her body cradled by the walls of the hollow. As they softened into dust, her mind, once a conduit for something older than time, was now hers, again fractured, faded, but human. She was not dead, but she was no longer only herself. A fragment of the prison remained inside her, not the god, but the memory of forgetting, a seed of silence, planted so deeply within her that nothing, not even the god, could root it out. The lock had vanished. The well had closed, and the lunar surface slowly sealed itself, the fractured stone knitting back together like scar tissue over a healed wound. Back on Earth, the world awakened. Those who had drawn the glyphs forgot them. Those who had spoken the syllables forgot the sound. The paintings melted. The chants ceased. The towers of bone became dust. The name had been pulled from reality's archive, burned away like a cancerous page. Humanity would never know what had nearly escaped. But in the far corners of the world, a few still felt it, an ache behind the eyes, a silence to still, like waking from a dream that tried to follow them. And on the moon, Alara stood on the surface once more, staring at Earth. She no longer wore her suit. She didn't need it. The hollow had changed her. The stars above shimmered like old friends, and the pale Earth floated quietly in the dark like a marble of forgetfulness. Alara smiled. "We remembered the god," she whispered, "but we chose not to name it, and that's what saved us." She pressed her hand into the lunar soil. The glyph was gone, but beneath the surface, far below, the chains still hummed softly, not as warnings, but as songs. The moon would always be a prison, and now it had a new warden. Thank you for watching. If this story whispered something strange into your imagination, if it made you shiver, wonder, or fear the sky just a little more, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Mythology of the Void for more dark tales, forgotten gods, and cosmic horrors that lie just beneath our reality. And remember, some names should never be remembered, and some prisons should never be unlocked.